In the last few months, there have been several reports critical of some of the assumptions surrounding high-speed rail. We asked Fresno Mayor Ashley Swearingen, a supporter of high-speed rail, how she views these critical reports.
I think a lot of the criticism, frankly, the problem that I have with it is not that I believe this project should go through without any kind of scrutiny. Of course, there should be scrutiny. There should be all kinds of appropriate oversight to make sure this project is successful. But it really feels like a lot of the people who are bringing that criticism simply want to kill it, as opposed to saying, look, we see some dangers here. Let's find a way to get around those dangers. For example, we know there are challenges in getting the train through Fresno, but we've worked very closely with the High-Speed Rail Authority staff, and there are engineering solutions that are cost-effective to deal with some of the glitches we find in just getting the train through Fresno. So I think that kind of an approach, I'm not suggesting we need to be, blind supporters of high-speed rail. Our eyes have to be wide open, but we have to come from a mindset of let's find a way to make this work, as opposed to let's find a way to kill it and doom it to failure.
Well, Professor David Brownstone of UC Irvine is the author of one of those reports, published by the Institute of Transportation Studies at UC Berkeley. Professor Brownstone, welcome to the MADDY report.
Thank you.
Your report is fairly technical, but what are your basic findings?
Well, the key finding is simply that the demand forecasts, which are critical for assessing the profitability, essentially, of the high-speed rail system, are unreliable. There's sort of two issues there. One is that they made a methodological mistake, which is probably going to be hard to explain here, but they also did not even bother to try to calculate error bands around their forecasts. So we really don't know. So I don't leave the impression that our report is damning high-speed rail. On the contrary, my colleagues and I think are generally supportive. The problem is that the critical demand forecasts, which are going to be really important for getting investors.
And demand, you mean the ridership forecast?
Ridership. We just don't know whether they're good, bad, or otherwise.
Rolf Van Ark, the executive director of California's High-Speed Rail Authority, has said that the ridership model that they used has, quote, has been used and continues to be a sound model for high-speed rail planning, unquote. Now, what do you think is wrong specifically with the authority's ridership model?
Okay, well, specifically, there's two problems. One, normally when you do a study of something, you go do a survey, we do what's called a random survey, which means everybody has the same chance of being surveyed. To save costs, they didn't do that.
But they only talked to the board of high-speed rail?
No, they went to airports and talked to some people at the airport. They talked to some people they could find on Amtrak, and they randomly talked to a bunch of automobile users. Okay. Problem is the resulting sample is not a random sample of the California population. So, for example, roughly over half of that sample were people who flew. But if you look at the ridership on this corridor, 90% of it is automobile. And they did not properly account for that when they did their estimations. Now, to be fair, that was based on a paper that was published in 2005, turned out to be erroneous. So I liken the situation to what happened somewhere in the late 60s. My brother went into the doctor, said, you need to have your tonsils out. My parents delayed. 2 years later, a study comes out saying 90% of tonsillectomies are a waste. Well, at that point, you stop. You don't go back and do the tonsillectomy just because that happened to be the standard 2 years ago. So.
Now, the company that did this, Cambridge Systematics, the one who did the original study for the authority, contests your report saying that, quote, it focuses on academic viewpoints and ignores what it takes to create a model for real-world application, unquote. It seems to be saying that you live in an ivory tower. Is your analysis too academic and not practical enough?
No. First of all, we don't live in ivory towers. I wish it was ivory. It's more like Formica, given the current budget. But the problem is that, as we've said in the report, we think the Cambridge Systematics work was up to industry standards, whatever that means. The problem is that industry standard in this case is not very good. There's been a recent review of demand forecasting for rail and road projects worldwide. It finds that almost all, 9 out of 10 rail forecasts are off by over 50%. And furthermore, that the margin of error for these forecasts is huge. So the question is this sufficient for reducing the uncertainty of a project of this size? And we think not. The other thing I will point out, which is kind of ironic, is Cambridge Systematics was actually one of the founding people of Cambridge Systematics was Professor Daniel McFadden. He's the person who developed the basic methodology that they're using. It turns out McFadden was the one who published the paper that we relied upon to show that their demand study was wrong.
So it's all in the family.
It's all in the family, and I don't really understand why Cambridge Systematics is being so combative, because I think it would have been simpler for them to say, okay, you know, we made a mistake here, we didn't know this, so we'll go back and fix it. That, I think, would have been a better approach.
Well, thank you very much for your insights on that.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll discuss the state's commitment to high-speed rail. Is Sacramento still on board? That conversation in a moment. This is the MADDY Report. Californians seem to like the idea of high-speed rail. In 2008, voters approved Prop 1A, the $9 billion bond measure for high-speed rail. And despite some persistent and vocal critics, polls show that Californians still support high-speed rail. What's the mood in Sacramento? Our next guest should know. Assemblymember Kathleen Galgiani, thank you for being here. I know you're a big supporter of high-speed rail, but there have been a slew of some critical reports from Professor Brownstone and his group, the legislative analyst, the state auditor, and others. How do you respond to these reports?
Well, like anything else, it's very easy to be critical. The more challenging part is to be able to move a project of this size forward. I would like to specifically respond to the LAO report that was issued last week and point out that I found that the timing was extremely interesting, because now that the Central Valley is receiving $5.925 billion, many have come forward questioning that decision. The application process for the funding actually began in June of 2009, and never at any point did the LAO's office or any member of the legislature come forward and question that process or try to influence or give recommendations for that process. It wasn't until after it was decided that the money would come to the Central Valley that the critics are coming forward regarding the decision. There were a number of other problems that I saw with the LAO report, and while there are some recommendations that deserve consideration, I felt that one major flaw was that the report didn't give any background whatsoever about the extensive process that was used by the Federal Railroad Administration and the Department of Transportation. There was no discussion of what the R requirements were, and there was no discussion about what the $3.31 billion that we initially had in hand could have bought us. For example, if the LAO's office had done their homework, the public would know that that initial money would have only bought us 15 miles worth of track and no electrification in Southern California. So I feel
as
at
opposed
best,
to 120 miles we're talking about here in the Central Valley.
Yes. So I feel at best the LAO report was misleading and at worst arrogant.
Well, let's talk about some positive things.
Okay.
Let's talk about the benefits of high-speed rail as you see it. Quickly, list some of the benefits from your perspective.
Well, there are many. If we don't build high-speed rail, California would need to build 3,000 miles of highway, 5 additional runways at airports, and 91 additional departure gates. And in many places, the airlines are actually oversubscribed. In Southern California and the Bay Area, for example, they are oversubscribed already. Secondly, the number of jobs that in particularly we desperately need during this economic situation. High-speed rail will provide 600,000 jobs over the life of the project, and the $5.925 billion that we will begin construction with next September will provide 120,000 jobs in the Central Valley, and that's really going to give a kickstart to the economy here and put California's economy back on a fast track to recovery.
You know, recently we asked Mayor Ashley Swearingen of Fresno what she meant when she said that our legislators should look at ways of fast-tracking high-speed rail.
I think that the state and the federal government have an incredibly important role of oversight to play, but my problem with some of the ways that our legislators have been approaching this, it's as if they seek to kill it. They're not seeking to find solutions to the legitimate issues that still remain about high-speed rail. They seek to kill it just on the concept and just on the surface of it. So I really think we have to approach this recognizing its potential economic value to certainly our region and the rest of California. It's worth it to see if we can't navigate around the pitfalls we know are there in order to see this project be a success.